If you watched part 1 of this series, you know that Spinoza tore apart the foundations of revealed religion. You know that he exposed how prophets were not divine messengers but political leaders. You know that he showed how sacred texts were written by men with agendas, not dictated by God. But here is what we did not tell you. Here is the question that keeps religious leaders awake at night more than any of Spinoza's criticisms. What happens next? What happens after you accept that the Quran, the Bible, and the Torah are human documents? What happens when you realize that religious authority is built on manipulation? Do you just abandon faith entirely? Do you become an atheist? Do you lose your community, your identity, your moral compass? This is the part that terrifies religious leaders even more than Spinoza's deconstruction. Because Spinoza did not stop at tearing down, he built something new. He offered an alternative that is so powerful, so dangerous, that it could actually save religion from itself. And that is exactly what the authorities cannot allow. Today we are diving into what part 1 left out. We are exploring the forbidden chapter of Spinoza's philosophy. The part where he shows Muslims, Christians, Jews, and everyone else how to keep their spirituality without the superstition, how to keep their community without the control, how to keep their connection to the divine without the manipulation. This is not about destroying Islam. This is about transforming it. And no religious leader wants you to know that this transformation is even possible. Let us begin. Now, before we go deeper, we need to understand why this matters. Why is it not enough to just expose the problems with organized religion? Why do we need part 2? Here is the uncomfortable truth. If we only deconstruct faith, if we only tear down the structures without offering something real to replace them, we create a disaster. We create a generation of people who are lost, who have no moral foundation, who have no sense of meaning or purpose. And when people feel lost, when they feel empty, they do one of two things. Either they fall into complete nihilism, believing that nothing matters, that life has no meaning, that morality is just an illusion, or they run back to the very dogmas they escaped from. They return to religious fundamentalism because at least it gives them certainty, even if that certainty is a prison. We have seen this pattern throughout history. When the Soviet Union tried to eliminate religion by force, what happened? Religion came back stronger and more extreme. When Western secularism offers nothing but materialism and empty pleasure, what happens? Young people turn to radical ideologies, searching for something deeper, something that gives their lives meaning. This is the trap. Criticism without construction leads to chaos. Deconstruction without reconstruction leaves people vulnerable. And Spinoza understood this 350 years ago. He knew that you cannot just destroy people's faith and walk away. You have to show them what comes next. You have to give them a spirituality that is based on reason, not fear. A community that is based on freedom, not control. A connection to the divine that is based on understanding, not blind obedience. If we do not learn this lesson, if we do not understand what Spinoza built after he tore down the old structures, then all the truth we revealed in part 1 becomes useless. It becomes just another form of destruction. And that is exactly what religious authorities are counting on. They want critics to only destroy because they know people will eventually come crawling back. But Spinoza did not just destroy, he created something better. And that is what we are about to explore. So let us talk about what Spinoza actually envisioned, because this is where everything changes. This is where we move from criticism to creation. When Spinoza analyzed Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, he was not trying to eliminate these traditions. He was trying to free them from the chains of superstition and political control. He saw something beautiful buried underneath all the dogma, all the fear, all the manipulation. He saw genuine spirituality. He saw ethical wisdom. He saw communities trying to connect with something greater than themselves. And he believed that all of this could survive, could even thrive, without the supernatural claims and authoritarian structures. Let us be very clear about what this means for Islam specifically. Spinoza is not asking Muslims to stop being Muslims. He is not asking them to abandon their identity, their culture, their heritage. He is asking them to separate the eternal wisdom from the temporary rules, to separate the universal ethics from the 7th century Arabian politics, to separate genuine spiritual experience from the fear-based obedience that religious authorities demand. Think about what Islam could become under this vision. Imagine a Muslim who still values the Quran, who still finds profound meaning in its poetry, its moral teachings, its call to justice and compassion. But this Muslim does not believe that every word was literally dictated by an angel. This Muslim understands that the Quran is a human text, written by Muhammad and his community, reflecting their struggles, their wisdom, their limitations. And that is okay. That does not make the wisdom less valuable, it just makes it honest. This Muslim still prays, but not out of fear that God will punish them if they miss a prayer. They pray because it brings them peace, because it connects them to their community, because it is a moment of reflection in a chaotic world. This Muslim still fasts during Ramadan, but not because they believe God is counting their hours. They fast because it teaches discipline, because it builds empathy for the hungry, because it is a tradition that connects them to millions of others. This Muslim still values community, still participates in rituals, still finds meaning in Islamic ethics. But they do it freely, they do it with understanding. They do it because it genuinely enriches their life, not because they are terrified of hell. Now, here is what makes this vision so powerful and so dangerous. It is not new. It is not a Western import. It already existed within Islam itself. In part 1, we briefly mentioned the Mutazilites. Let us talk about them more deeply now because they prove that Spinoza's approach is not foreign to Islamic tradition. The Mutazilites were a school of Islamic theology that flourished in the 8th and 9th centuries, and they believed something revolutionary. They believed that reason must be the foundation of faith. They argued that the Quran should be interpreted rationally, not literally. They said that human beings have free will, not blind predestination. They taught that God's justice must align with human concepts of justice, not contradict them. They even claimed that the Quran was created by God, not eternal and uncreated. Why does this matter? Because if the Quran is created, it is contingent, it is contextual, it is open to interpretation. If the Quran is eternal and uncreated, it is absolute, it is untouchable, it is beyond question. The Mutazilites were the rationalist wing of Islam, and for a brief period, they were even officially supported by the Abbasid caliphs. Baghdad became a center of philosophy, science, and rational theology. Muslims translated Greek philosophy. They debated ideas freely. They made massive contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and logic. This was Islam at its most creative, its most intellectually vibrant. But then the backlash came. The Ash'arites, a more conservative school, defeated the Mutazilites. They rejected rationalism. They insisted on literal interpretation of scripture. They closed the door of ijtihad, independent reasoning. They promoted taqlid, blind imitation of past authorities. And Islamic intellectual culture began a long decline that continues in many places to this day. But here is the crucial point. The Mutazilites were not less Muslim because they used reason. They were not Western puppets. They were not traitors to Islam. They were Muslims who took seriously the Quranic verses that tell believers to think, to reflect, to use their minds. They were continuing a tradition that goes back to the very beginning of Islam, when early Muslims absorbed and built upon Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge. Then there is Averroes, known in Arabic as Ibn Rushd. He was a 12th century Muslim philosopher who spent his life trying to harmonize Aristotelian philosophy with Islamic theology. He argued that truth cannot contradict truth. If reason leads to one conclusion and scripture seems to say something else, then scripture must be interpreted metaphorically. He believed that philosophy is not the enemy of religion, but its highest form. The masses need simple stories and rituals. The intellectuals need rational understanding. Both paths lead to the same truth. Averroes was condemned by religious authorities. His books were burned. He was exiled. Why? Because he dared to say that philosophers have the right and the duty to interpret scripture rationally. Because he threatened the monopoly of religious scholars on truth. But his ideas survived. They were translated into Latin. They influenced Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. They helped spark the European Renaissance. Islamic rationalism did not die, it just moved elsewhere because it was suppressed in its birthplace. And this is exactly what Spinoza is calling for, a return to this rationalist tradition, a revival of the idea that faith and reason are not enemies, a recognition that you can be a Muslim and still think critically about Islamic texts and traditions. What would this reformed Islam look like in practice? It would be an Islam where women have full equality because the 7th century patriarchal rules are recognized as contextual, not eternal. It would be an Islam where apostasy is not a crime because faith is understood as a personal choice, not a tribal obligation. It would be an Islam where homosexuality is not punished because sexual ethics are based on consent and harm, not ancient purity codes. It would be an Islam where science is celebrated, not feared, because understanding nature is understanding God. It would be an Islam where other religions are respected, not merely tolerated, because no one has a monopoly on spiritual truth. It would be an Islam where questioning is encouraged, not punished, because honest doubt is more valuable than fake certainty. Does this Islam exist today? Yes, in small pockets. There are progressive Muslim communities, liberal mosques, reformist scholars who are trying to create exactly this vision. But they are marginalized. They are called heretics, apostates, Western agents. They receive death threats. They have to live in exile. Why? Because this reformed Islam is the greatest threat to religious authorities. It cannot be easily dismissed like atheism. It cannot be painted as foreign like secularism. It is Islam. It just refuses to be controlled. And that is what Spinoza saw. He saw that the real battle is not between religion and no religion. It is between authoritarian religion and free religion, between religion as control and religion as genuine spirituality. And he showed the path forward. A path that honors tradition without being enslaved to it. A path that values community without sacrificing individual conscience. A path that seeks the divine through understanding, not fear. This is what Islam could become. This is what terrifies those in power. And this is why Spinoza's vision remains forbidden. Now let us talk about something that Part 1 barely touched, something deeply personal and painful. The psychological damage that religious control inflicts on human beings. Because Spinoza was not just a cold philosopher analyzing texts. He understood human psychology. He understood what happens to a person's mind, their emotions, their sense of self, when they live under religious fear and authoritarian control. And this is critical because if we do not understand the psychological prison, we cannot understand why freedom is so difficult, so terrifying for many believers. Spinoza wrote extensively about what he called the passions. These are the emotions that control us when we do not understand their true causes. Fear, hope, guilt, shame. And he noticed something profound. Revealed religions deliberately cultivate these specific emotions to maintain control over believers. It is not an accident. It is the system working exactly as designed. Let us start with fear. Religious authorities teach you from childhood that God is watching your every thought, your every action, that He is keeping a detailed record of your sins, that hell is waiting for you if you disobey, eternal torture, unimaginable suffering, forever. And this is not presented as a metaphor or a symbolic warning. It is presented as literal truth. Your own parents, people who love you, tell you this. Your teachers tell you this. Your entire community reinforces this message constantly. What does this do to a child's developing mind? It creates chronic anxiety. It creates a sense that you are never safe, never good enough, always one mistake away from divine punishment. You learn to monitor yourself constantly. You learn to feel guilty for natural human thoughts and desires. You learn that your own mind is your enemy because it produces thoughts that God disapproves of. This is psychological torture, and it starts before you are old enough to question it, before you have developed critical thinking skills, before you can consent to this worldview. By the time you are an adult, the fear is so deeply embedded that even when your rational mind questions the beliefs, your emotional system still reacts as if the threats are real. Then there is hope, but not the healthy kind of hope. Religious control uses what Spinoza called superstitious hope. This is the hope that if you perform the right rituals, say the right prayers, follow the right rules, then God will reward you. You will go to paradise, you will get blessings in this life, your prayers will be answered, but here is the trap. This hope is always uncertain. You never know if you have done enough. Maybe you missed a prayer. Maybe your intention was not pure enough. Maybe God is testing you. So you do more. You become more strict. You police yourself harder. And when good things happen, you thank God. When bad things happen, you blame yourself for not being faithful enough. You are trapped in a cycle where you can never win, where you are always anxious, always striving, always feeling inadequate. And then there is guilt and shame. These are perhaps the most destructive emotions that religious control uses. You are taught that you are born sinful, born impure, born deserving of punishment. In Islamic theology, humans are born pure, but the message is similar. You are weak. You are prone to sin. You need constant guidance from religious authorities. You cannot trust your own judgment. Every natural human desire becomes a potential sin. Sexual desire, anger, pride, even doubt itself. You learn to hate parts of yourself. You learn to see your own humanity as something dirty, something that needs to be suppressed and controlled. And when you inevitably fail to live up to impossible standards, the shame is overwhelming. But you cannot express this shame openly, because that would mean admitting doubt, which is itself sinful. So you suffer in silence. You perform piety publicly while dying inside privately. Spinoza understood all of this, and he explained it through his concept of imaginatio versus ratio. Imaginatio is when we understand the world through confused, emotional, second-hand ideas. We believe things because we were told them, because we fear the consequences of not believing, because everyone around us believes them. We do not actually understand, we just react emotionally. Ratio is when we understand the world through clear, logical, first-hand reasoning. We see the actual causes of things. We understand why we feel what we feel. We are no longer controlled by confused emotions because we see through them. Religious control keeps people trapped in imagination. It deliberately prevents them from developing ratio. Because once you start genuinely understanding, once you start seeing the real causes behind religious claims and religious emotions, the control breaks. But here is the part that critics of religion often miss. The part that Part 1 did not adequately address. Religion provides something real and valuable that people need. Community, belonging, shared meaning, ritual structure, moral framework, connection to something larger than yourself. These are not trivial needs. These are fundamental human needs. When you grow up in a religious community, your entire social world is built around shared faith. Your family, your friends, your social events, your life milestones, everything is intertwined with religion. Your identity is shaped by it. Your sense of who you are in the world comes partly from your religious belonging. So what happens when you start questioning? What happens when Spinoza's analysis starts making sense to you? You face a terrifying choice. If you leave the religion, you do not just lose a set of beliefs. You lose your community, You lose your family's approval, you may lose your family entirely. You lose your friends, you lose your social support system, you lose your identity, you become an outsider in the only world you have ever known. And what do you get in return? Freedom? Yes. But freedom can be terrifying when you have never exercised it. Rationality? Yes, but rationality alone does not give you community or belonging. Truth? Yes, but truth can be cold comfort when you are sitting alone, cut off from everyone you love. This is the void that opens up when you deconstruct faith without having something to replace it with. And this void is real. It is painful. And it drives many people back into the very beliefs they had started to question. Not because the arguments convinced them again, but because the psychological and social cost of leaving is too high. They choose the comfortable prison over the lonely freedom. Spinoza saw this problem clearly. And this is why he did not just tear down religion. He offered an alternative spirituality, an alternative community, an alternative way of connecting to the divine. His concept of intellectual love of God is the answer to this void. It is not cold rationality. It is not emotionless logic. It is a genuine spiritual experience based on understanding. When you understand nature, when you see how everything is connected, when you grasp the infinite complexity and beauty of reality, you feel something profound. Awe, wonder, joy, love. Not love for a personal God who rewards and punishes, but love for existence itself. Love for the fact that anything exists at all. Love for the intricate patterns, the natural laws, the emergence of consciousness, the mystery of being. This is spiritual, this is transcendent, but it is not based on superstition or fear. It is based on genuine understanding. And it cannot be taken away from you by any religious authority because it comes from your direct experience of reality, not from what someone told you to believe. Spinoza also understood that humans need community. So he did not tell people to become isolated hermits. He encouraged the formation of communities based on reason and freedom, not dogma and control. Communities where people support each other in the pursuit of understanding, where doubt is welcomed, not punished, where diversity of thought is celebrated, not feared, where the bonds are based on genuine affection and shared values, not on fear of ostracism. These communities existed in Spinoza's time, small groups of free thinkers, philosophers, scientists, who met in secret to discuss forbidden ideas. And they exist today. Secular communities, humanist organizations, progressive religious groups, online networks of people who have left fundamentalism but kept their spirituality. They are harder to find than traditional religious communities, but they exist. The psychological journey from religious control to rational spirituality is difficult. Spinoza never pretended it was easy. You have to face your fears directly. You have to sit with the anxiety that comes when you stop believing in divine protection. You have to grieve the loss of certainty. You have to rebuild your identity from the ground up. You have to find new communities or build them yourself. But on the other side of this difficult journey is something precious. Authentic freedom, genuine understanding, real relationships based on honesty, not performance. Self-acceptance instead of self-hatred. Peace instead of chronic anxiety. And a spirituality that grows deeper as you learn more, instead of one that requires you to stop learning, stop questioning, stop growing. This is what Spinoza offers, not just criticism, but a path through the pain to something better. And this is what part 1 did not fully explain. The psychological reality of what it means to leave the prison and how to survive and thrive on the outside. Now we arrive at the most suppressed part of this entire discussion, the connection between Spinoza's philosophy and Islamic mysticism. This is the chapter that both religious authorities and secular critics want to bury. Why? Because it destroys their neat categories. It shows that mystical Islam and rational philosophy can actually lead to the same place, and that terrifies everyone who profits from keeping religion and reason as enemies. Let us start with a simple observation. Spinoza was excommunicated by the Jewish community in Amsterdam in 1656. He was cursed, expelled, cut off from his own people for his dangerous ideas. But do you know who else faced persecution within Islam? The Sufis, the Islamic mystics. They were condemned, tortured, and killed by orthodox religious authorities for centuries. The most famous example is Al-Hallaj, a Persian mystic who was executed in Baghdad in 922. His crime? He said, "Ana al-Haq, I am the truth, I am the reality, I am God." The orthodox authorities were horrified. This was blasphemy of the highest order. How dare a human being claim to be God? How dare he suggest that the divine and the human could become one? They tortured him for years. They cut off his hands and feet, they crucified him, they burned his body, all because he expressed a mystical experience that threatened their power. But what was Al-Hallaj really saying? Was he claiming to be a supernatural deity sitting on a throne in the sky? No. He was expressing the Sufi concept of fana, annihilation of the ego, the dissolution of the separate self into the infinite reality. When you go deep enough in meditation, when you strip away all the layers of identity and conditioning, what remains? Not a separate individual, not a soul trapped in a body. Just pure consciousness, pure existence, the same existence that animates everything. In that moment of realization, there is no difference between you and God, because God is not separate from reality. God is reality itself. Now listen carefully to what Spinoza said. God or nature, Deus sive natura. God and nature are the same thing. There is only one substance, one reality, and everything that exists is a modification of that single substance. You are not separate from God. You are an expression of God, a wave in the infinite ocean. When you deeply understand your place in nature, when you see how you are connected to everything, you experience what Spinoza called the intellectual love of God. This is not an emotion in the ordinary sense. It is the highest form of understanding. It is seeing yourself as part of the infinite whole. And in that seeing, the boundaries dissolve. The fear disappears. The separation is revealed as an illusion. Do you see the similarity? Al-Hallaj saying, "I am the truth," and Spinoza saying, "We are all modes of the one divine substance." These are not identical philosophies. One comes from mystical practice, one comes from rigorous logical reasoning, but they arrive at remarkably similar conclusions. The separate self is an illusion. God is not a distant being. God is the deepest reality of existence itself, and awakening to this truth brings liberation. This connection is not an accident. Spinoza lived in Amsterdam during the Golden Age, when there was extensive contact with the Islamic world. Jewish philosophers had been translating and studying Islamic philosophy for centuries. Spinoza read Maimonides, who was deeply influenced by Islamic rationalism. He knew about Averroes. He may have known about Sufi ideas, filtering through various channels. But more importantly, when you dig deep enough into reality, when you use reason to its limit, or when you use meditation to dissolve the ego, you hit the same truths. Let us look at more parallels. Sufis speak of Tawhid, the absolute oneness of God. Not just that there is one God, but that there is only God. Everything else is an appearance, a manifestation, but not separate from the divine essence. The famous Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God." Spinoza would agree completely. He argued that everything that exists is in God, and nothing can exist or be conceived without God. There is no reality outside of the one infinite substance. Separation is the illusion, unity is the truth. Sufis practice dhikr, the remembrance of God, repeating divine names until the one remembering and the one remembered become one. Spinoza speaks of the third kind of knowledge, intuitive science, where you see individual things as they really are, as expressions of the eternal and infinite essence of God. Different language, same experience. Sufis were persecuted by Orthodox Islam for exactly the same reason Spinoza was excommunicated by Orthodox Judaism. They threatened the power structure. If God is directly accessible to everyone through mystical experience or through reason, then what do you need the religious authorities for? If the truth is found within, not in external scripture and ritual, then the scholars and imams lose their monopoly. If salvation comes from direct understanding, not from obedience to religious law, then the entire control system collapses. The orthodox authorities of Islam fought the Sufis for centuries. Sometimes they won and mystics were killed. Sometimes they lost and Sufism became integrated into mainstream Islam, but in a watered-down, controlled form. The dangerous radical edge was dulled. The mystical orders were brought under the supervision of religious scholars. The ecstatic experiences were channeled into acceptable rituals. But the truly radical Sufis, the ones who spoke clearly about the unity of existence, about the illusion of the separate self, about finding God within rather than in external authority, these Sufis remain dangerous. Ibn Arabi, the great Andalusian mystic, developed a complete philosophy of Wahdat al-Wujud, unity of being. Everything is God. There is nothing but God, appearing in infinite forms. Orthodox scholars tried to declare him a heretic for centuries. Mansur al-Haraj was executed, as we mentioned. Many other Sufi masters faced persecution, exile, or death. Why? Because they discovered the same truth that Spinoza discovered through a different path. And that truth is incompatible with religious authoritarianism. Here is what makes this connection so explosive. It proves that the rationalist critique of religion and the mystical transcendence of religion are not opposites. They are allies. Spinoza arriving at God equals nature through philosophy. Sufis arriving at unity of being through meditation and mystical practice. Both dissolving the boundaries between human and divine. Both making external religious authority obsolete. Both offering direct access to spiritual truth. This is why both religious fundamentalists and hardcore atheists hate this connection. Religious fundamentalists hate it because it undermines their authority and their literal interpretation of Scripture. If mystical experience and rational philosophy both lead beyond dogma, then what is left of their power? Hardcore atheists hate it because it shows that rationality does not have to lead to materialism, that you can reject superstition and still have profound spiritual experiences, that the choice is not between blind faith and cold nihilism. There is a third option, the option that Spinoza and the Sufis both point to. Understanding reality so deeply, whether through reason or through meditative insight, that you experience your unity with existence itself. This is spirituality without superstition. This is transcendence without theology. This is the divine without dogma. And this is what no religious leader wants you to discover, because if you discover it, you are free. You cannot be controlled anymore. Not by threats of hell, not by promises of paradise, not by claims of special revelation, not by religious law. You have found the source directly. And once you have tasted that freedom, that direct knowing, you can never be imprisoned again. So when we talk about what Islam could become under Spinoza's vision, we are not talking about importing Western secularism. We are talking about recovering the mystical heart of Islam that has always existed but has been suppressed. We are talking about the Islam of Rumi, of Ibn Arabi, of Al-Hallaj, the Islam that sees God in everything, that finds the divine through direct experience, that values love and understanding over law and obedience. This Islam exists. It has always existed. It just needs to be freed from the chains that orthodox authorities have wrapped around it. And that is the forbidden chapter, the chapter that shows the path was always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to walk it. Now let us get extremely practical, because philosophy is useless if it stays in books. Mystical experiences are beautiful, But what do you do on Monday morning when you wake up and still have to face your family, your community, your own confusion? If you are a Muslim who resonates with Spinoza's ideas, if you feel the truth in what the Sufis discovered, but you are living in a world that demands orthodox conformity, what do you actually do? This is the question that Part 1 completely avoided, and it is the most important question. So let us answer it honestly. First, understand that this is a journey, not a light switch. You do not go from orthodox believer to free thinker overnight, and you should not try to. Rapid transformation is destabilizing. It breaks relationships. It creates unnecessary pain. Spinoza himself did not announce his ideas publicly until he was ready. He studied quietly. He thought deeply. He built a support network of like-minded people. Only then did he express his views more openly, and even then he published anonymously to protect himself. You can do the same. Start by giving yourself permission to question privately. You do not owe anyone immediate answers. You do not have to announce your doubts to your family at dinner tonight. Create a private space, whether it is a journal, a private online account, or conversations with trusted friends, where you can explore these ideas honestly without fear of judgment. Second, educate yourself deeply. Do not just read critics of Islam. Read Islamic history. Read the rationalist Muslim philosophers. Read the Sufis. Read modern reformist scholars. Understand that the version of Islam you were taught is not the only version that has ever existed. Learn about the Mutazilites we discussed earlier. Read Averroes. Read Muhammad Iqbal, the 20th century philosopher who tried to reconstruct Islamic thought. Read Fazlur Rahman, who applied modern hermeneutics to the Quran. Read contemporary thinkers like Khaled Abu el-Fadl, Amina Wadud, Farid Essaq. These are Muslims who are doing exactly what we are talking about. They are applying critical thinking to their tradition while remaining within it. They prove that it is possible. You are not alone in this journey. There is a whole intellectual tradition supporting you. Third, learn to distinguish between identity and belief. You can be culturally Muslim without believing every theological claim. You can value your heritage, participate in community events, maintain family relationships, all while privately holding different views about the nature of the Quran or the existence of God. Many people do this successfully. They see their religious identity as ethnic, cultural, and communal rather than purely theological. There is no hypocrisy in this. You are navigating a complex social reality. You are protecting yourself and your relationships while you figure things out. Spinoza would understand this completely. He knew that truth must be balanced with practical wisdom. Fourth, find your community. This is critical. You cannot do this alone. The psychological pressure is too intense. You need people who understand what you are going through. Look for progressive Muslim groups in your area or online. There are communities of cultural Muslims, ex-Muslims who remain connected to Islamic culture, and reformist Muslims who are reinterpreting their faith. Online forums, social media groups, and organizations like Muslims for Progressive Values exist specifically to support people on this journey. If you cannot find community locally, build it online. Connect with people going through similar questions. Share your struggles. Learn from others who are further along the path. Community is not optional, it is essential. Fifth, practice what Spinoza called the intellectual love of God in your daily life. What does this mean practically? It means cultivating wonder and gratitude for existence itself. When you see a sunset, do not just scroll past it. Stop, look, feel the awe. When you learn something new about how nature works, let yourself be amazed. When you connect deeply with another person, recognize that you are experiencing the unity that underlies all separation. These moments are spiritual, they are sacred, but they do not require belief in supernatural claims. They require presence and attention. This is the spirituality that survives the death of dogma. This is what remains when you strip away all the superstition. And it is enough. It is more than enough. Sixth, set boundaries with family and community. This is perhaps the hardest part. If you are in a conservative Muslim family or community, you will face pressure. Pressure to pray publicly, pressure to fast, pressure to conform, pressure to marry someone religious, pressure to raise your children in the faith. You have to decide what boundaries you can maintain without destroying your relationships. Maybe you continue to pray with your family even though your understanding of prayer has changed. Maybe you fast during Ramadan because it brings you closer to your community, not because you fear God's punishment. Maybe you attend mosque occasionally to maintain relationships. Or maybe you decide that the cost of pretending is too high and you gradually create distance. There is no universal right answer. You have to assess your specific situation and make wise choices. But whatever you choose, be clear with yourself about what you are doing and why. Seventh, if you have children or plan to have children, think carefully about what you want to pass on. Do you want to raise them in Orthodox Islam? Do you want to raise them with no religious education at all? Or do you want to teach them about Islamic culture and ethics while also teaching them critical thinking? Many people choose the middle path. They expose their children to the tradition, to the stories, to the community, but they also teach them to question, to think independently, to respect all traditions. They say things like, "Some people believe this, and here is why they find it meaningful. What do you think?" He raises children who are culturally connected but intellectually free. It is harder than simply indoctrinating them or completely cutting them off from tradition, but it is the approach that honors both heritage and reason. Eighth, be patient with yourself. You will have moments of doubt about your doubts. You will have moments when you miss the certainty you used to have. You will have moments when you wonder if you are making a terrible mistake. This is normal. This is part of the process. Spinoza himself struggled. The Sufis talk about the dark night of the soul, the period of confusion and pain before enlightenment. You are deconstructing a worldview that was built over decades. You are rebuilding your identity from the ground up. This takes time. It takes courage. It takes compassion for yourself. Do not expect to have everything figured out quickly. Do not judge yourself for moments of fear or confusion. Keep moving forward. Keep learning. Keep connecting with people who support your journey. Ninth, contribute to the reform movement. Once you are stable in your own understanding, once you have found your footing, consider how you can help others. Maybe you write about your experiences. Maybe you create content that helps other questioning Muslims. Maybe you support organizations working for reform. Maybe you simply have honest conversations with people in your life who are also questioning. The reform of Islam will not come from outside. It will not be imposed by Western secularism. It will come from within, from Muslims who love their tradition enough to free it from authoritarian control. You can be part of this movement. Your journey matters. Your voice matters. And finally, 10th, remember the goal. The goal is not to destroy Islam. The goal is not to become Western. The goal is not to reject spirituality. The goal is freedom. Freedom to think. Freedom to question. Freedom to connect with the divine in your own authentic way. Freedom to live according to reason and conscience, rather than fear and control. This is what Spinoza fought for. This is what the Sufis experienced. This is what you are seeking. And it is absolutely possible. Thousands of people have walked this path before you. Thousands are walking it right now. And thousands more will walk it after you. You are part of a movement that is slowly, quietly transforming how people relate to religion. It is messy, it is difficult, it takes decades or generations. But it is happening. And you can be part of it. This is the practical roadmap. This is how you actually apply these ideas to your real life. Not in theory, not in philosophy, but in the daily choices you make, the boundaries you set, the communities you build, and the freedom you claim for yourself. Now we arrive at the deepest secret. the truth that keeps religious authorities awake at night, and it is not what you think. Religious leaders are not afraid of atheism. They are not afraid of secular materialism. They are not even that afraid of people leaving religion entirely. Why? Because all of these can be dismissed. Atheists can be painted as immoral, lost, empty. Secularism can be portrayed as Western corruption. People who leave entirely can be written off as apostates, who are never true believers anyway. The system survives, the authority remains intact, but there is one thing that terrifies them more than anything else: reformed religion. Religion that keeps the community, keeps the ethics, keeps the spirituality, but rejects authoritarian control. Religion that cannot be dismissed as foreign or immoral because it comes from within the tradition itself. Religion that makes religious authorities obsolete. This is what Spinoza represents. This is what the Sufis represented. And this is why they were all violently suppressed. Not because they were wrong, not because they were dangerous to believers, but because they were dangerous to the power structure. Let us be very clear about what is at stake here. Religious authority is not just about spiritual guidance. It is about money. It is about political power. It is about social control. In many Muslim-majority countries, religious institutions control enormous wealth. They collect zakat, religious taxes. They manage waqf, religious endowments. They control educational institutions. They influence or directly control legal systems. They have veto power over government decisions. They shape public opinion through Friday sermons. This is billions of dollars and enormous political influence, and all of it depends on one thing: the belief that religious scholars have special access to divine truth, that they are necessary intermediaries between God and ordinary believers, that their interpretation of Scripture is authoritative, that questioning them is questioning God himself. Now imagine what happens if Spinoza's ideas spread widely. If Muslims start believing that the Quran is a human text that can be interpreted by anyone with reason and conscience. If they start believing that religious law is historically contingent, not eternally binding. If they start believing that they can connect directly with the divine without needing imams, sheikhs, or scholars to mediate. If they start believing that their own rational and moral judgment is as valid as any religious authority's opinion, what happens to the power structure? It collapses, the money stops flowing, the political influence evaporates, the social control breaks down. Religious authorities become what they should always have been: educated advisors who share their knowledge but do not claim special divine authority. Spiritual teachers who inspire but do not command. Community organizers who facilitate but do not dominate. In other words, they become servants rather than masters. And people who have tasted power do not give it up willingly. This is why the response to Spinoza was so extreme. This is why his books were banned throughout almost all of Europe. This is why he lived under constant threat. Christian authorities, Jewish authorities, even Muslim authorities who heard about his ideas all recognized the existential threat, not to religion itself, but to their control over religion. And here is the crucial point that changes everything. Spinoza's vision does not destroy religion, it saves it. Think about what is happening to Islam today in much of the world. In conservative Muslim countries, young people are leaving the faith in unprecedented numbers. Not publicly, because that would be dangerous, but privately. They stop believing. They go through the motions to avoid punishment, but their hearts are not in it. Why? Because the version of Islam they are offered is incompatible with modern knowledge, modern ethics, and modern life. They are told to believe that the earth is a few thousand years old, when science shows it is billions. They are told that evolution is false, when the evidence is overwhelming. They are told that women are naturally inferior, when they see women excelling in every field. They are told that homosexuality is a choice and a sin, when they know gay people who are living authentic lives. They are told to accept 7th century laws about war, slavery, and marriage, when these laws are clearly products of a different time, and they are given only 2 options: accept all of it without question, or leave entirely. No middle ground, no room for interpretation, no space for doubt. So they leave. And Islam loses an entire generation of its brightest minds. The most educated, the most thoughtful, the most creative young Muslims are the ones most likely to quietly abandon the faith. What remains is either the uneducated masses who follow without understanding, or the extremists who double down on rigid literalism. This is a catastrophe for Islam. But religious authorities do not see it this way. They see it as a test, as a purification, as weeding out the weak believers. They would rather rule over a shrinking, rigid, isolated community than lose control over a thriving, evolving, growing one. This is the psychology of authoritarian power. It prefers death to loss of control. But Spinoza's vision offers a way out. It offers Islam a path to survival and revival, a path where young, educated Muslims do not have to choose between their faith and their reason, where they can keep their cultural and spiritual connection to Islam while updating their understanding, where the Quran remains a source of wisdom and inspiration, even after you stop believing it was dictated by an angel, where Islamic ethics continue to guide behavior even after you recognize that some Quranic laws are outdated, where Muslim community remains strong even after you stop believing that non-Muslims are going to hell. This reformed Islam could thrive in the modern world. It could attract rather than repel educated people. It could engage with science rather than fighting it. It could champion human rights rather than opposing them. It could be a force for creativity, compassion, and wisdom, rather than a force for violence, oppression, and ignorance. And here is the evidence that this works. Look at Christianity in much of the Western world. Yes, fundamentalist Christianity still exists. Yes, it is loud and politically active, but mainstream Christianity has evolved dramatically. Most Christians do not believe in a literal 6-day creation. Most do not believe that non-Christians automatically go to hell. Most support gender equality. Many support LGBTQ rights. They read the Bible as a collection of ancient texts with wisdom and limitations, not as the inerrant word of God. They see Jesus as a moral teacher and spiritual inspiration, not necessarily as a supernatural being who performed miracles. Are these people Christians? Yes. Are they less spiritual than fundamentalists? No. Often they are more genuinely compassionate, more humble, more open to truth. They kept what was valuable in their tradition and released what was not. And Christianity survived, it evolved, it remained relevant. Judaism went through a similar transformation. Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism, and even many modern Orthodox Jews have adapted their tradition to modern life. They do not follow every law in the Torah literally. They do not believe that God dictated every word. They ordain women rabbis. They support LGBTQ inclusion. They engage with science and secular knowledge. They push alternative like. Are they Jews? Absolutely. Are they less connected to their heritage? No. They honor their heritage by keeping it alive and relevant. Islam can do the same. Islam must do the same if it is to survive as a living tradition rather than a museum piece. And Spinoza's philosophy provides the intellectual foundation for this transformation, not as a foreign import, but as a recovery of Islam's own rationalist and mystical traditions. The Mutazilites, Averroes, the Sufis, the tradition of ijtihad, independent reasoning. It has always been there, it just needs to be reclaimed. But religious authorities know this, and they fight it with everything they have. They issue fatwas declaring reformists to be apostates. They ban books. They control education. They use state power to enforce orthodoxy. They fund extremist groups that intimidate and kill dissidents. They spread propaganda, painting any reform as Western corruption. Why? not because they believe reform is religiously wrong, but because they know reform is a threat to their power. This is the secret they do not want you to know, that reformed religion is more dangerous to them than no religion, that Spinoza is more threatening than Dawkins, that a Muslim who thinks critically while remaining Muslim is more subversive than an ex-Muslim atheist, because reformed believers cannot be dismissed, cannot be marginalized, cannot be painted as outsiders. They are inside the tent demanding change, and that is the one thing authoritarians cannot tolerate. So when you understand Spinoza's vision for Islam, you are not just learning philosophy, you are joining a struggle that has been going on for centuries. A struggle between authoritarian control and human freedom, between dogma and reason, between fear and love, between power and truth. And this struggle matters. It matters for the hundreds of millions of Muslims who are suffering under oppressive religious regimes. It matters for the millions more who are torn between their heritage and their conscience. It matters for women denied equality, for LGBTQ people facing persecution, for intellectuals facing censorship, for children being indoctrinated with fear. It matters for the future of Islamic civilization, and it matters for the world, because a reformed, rational, compassionate Islam would be a powerful force for good. The irony is that religious authorities claim to be protecting Islam, but they are actually destroying it. By refusing to allow it to evolve, they are making it irrelevant. By enforcing rigid orthodoxy, they are driving people away. By using violence to suppress dissent, they are associating Islam with oppression. And by operating in defect, they are creating an unequal framework in which oppression and ideological disarray. Spinoza offers them a lifeline, a way to save the tradition by freeing it. But they refuse to take it, because saving Islam would mean losing their power. And they have made their choice. They choose power over the well-being of their own people, over the future of their own tradition. This is what they do not want you to know, that the real threat to Islam does not come from outside critics. It comes from internal authoritarianism, by the way. And the real hope for Islam does not come from defending orthodoxy. It comes from brave reformers who love their tradition enough to transform it. This is the truth no religious leader dares confront. So here we are, at the end of part 2, but really this is not an ending, this is a beginning. In part 1 we tore down the walls. We exposed how revealed religions, including Islam, were built on political power disguised as divine revelation. We showed how sacred texts are human documents, not supernatural dictations. We revealed the manipulation, the control, the fear that keeps people trapped. But tearing down is only half the work, and that is why part 2 is necessary. Today, we built something new. We showed you what Islam could become under Spinoza's vision. A faith based on reason, not fear. A spirituality based on understanding, not obedience. A community based on freedom, not control. We explored the psychological journey from religious prison to rational spirituality. We revealed the forbidden connection between Spinoza's philosophy and Sufi mysticism, proving that reason and transcendence are not enemies, but allies. We gave you a practical roadmap for how to actually walk this path in your real life, with your real family, in your real community. And we exposed the deepest secret, that religious authorities are not afraid of atheism. They are afraid of reformed religion. They are afraid of you, of Muslims who think critically while remaining Muslim, of people who cannot be dismissed or marginalized because they speak from inside the tradition, of believers who refuse to be controlled. This is the vision, this is the path, this is the revolution that is already happening quietly in millions of hearts around the world. But it needs you. It needs your voice. It needs your courage. It needs your willingness to think, to question, to stand for truth even when it is uncomfortable. So here is what I want you to do. First, tell me in the comments, what was the most challenging idea in this video for you? What resonated most deeply? What are you still struggling with? I want to know where you are on this journey, because this is not a lecture. This is a conversation, and your perspective matters. Second, if this video made you think, if it opened something in your mind, if it gave you hope that there is a way forward between blind faith and empty atheism, then share it. Share it with someone who is struggling with these questions. Share it with someone who feels trapped between their heritage and their conscience. Share it with someone who needs to know they are not alone. But be wise about it. Do not share it publicly if it will put you in danger. Do not use it to attack people who are not ready to hear these ideas. Use wisdom, use compassion, share it with those who are genuinely searching. Third, subscribe to this channel, because we are not done. There is more to explore. There are more forbidden ideas to uncover, more connections to reveal, more practical guidance to provide. This is part 2, but the journey continues, and I want you with me for what comes next. Fourth, go deeper. Do not just watch videos. Read Spinoza's own words. Read the theological political treatise. Read the ethics. Yes, they are challenging. Yes, they require focus, but they will change how you see everything. Read the Sufis. Read Rumi, Ibn Arabi, Al-Hallaj. Read the Muslim rationalists. Read Averroes, the Mutazilites, modern reformers. Educate yourself deeply, because this is not about believing me. This is about discovering truth for yourself. And fifth, live it. Do not let this just be an interesting intellectual exercise. Apply it. Start questioning privately. Find your community. Set your boundaries. Practice the intellectual love of God in your daily life. Raise your children with both roots and wings. Contribute to the reform movement in whatever way you can. Live as a free person. Live according to reason and conscience, not fear and control. This is how change happens. Not through grand revolutions, not through political movements, but through individuals, one by one, reclaiming their freedom, reclaiming their reason, reclaiming their right to connect with the divine directly, without intermediaries, without manipulation, without fear. Spinoza did this 350 years ago. The Sufis did this centuries before him. Muslim rationalists tried to do this and were suppressed. But the idea never dies. The truth never disappears. It just waits for the next generation brave enough to speak it. Maybe that generation is now. Maybe that person is you. In part 1, we revealed the truth no religious leader dares confront. In part 2, we showed the path no religious leader wants you to walk. The question now is simple. Will you walk it? Will you think for yourself? Will you free yourself? Or will you choose the comfortable prison of certainty over the challenging freedom of truth? The choice is yours. It has always been yours. The authorities just did not want you to know you had a choice. But now you know. Now you cannot unknow it, and that changes everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking. Thank you for having the courage to question. Comment below, share wisely, subscribe for more. And remember, authentic faith has nothing to fear from honest reflection. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Let us continue this journey together,